We're sisters, best friends, and authors on a mission to help you stoke your creative fire and live the life of your dreams. We believe that purpose fuels passion and that creativity is your secret weapon for mass construction. There's never been a better time to bless the world with your dream realized. You're listening to The Kate and Abbie Show.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Kate and Abbie Show. Today, we're diving into a highly requested topic by many of you. Many of you have asked us on YouTube, on our social media platforms, via email. Please make a podcast episode about how to make writing playlists. You hear us talk about it quite a bit. We both enjoy making writing playlists. We think it's a wonderful part of getting inspired to write. Can help you get in the writing zone. Can be a very nice way to curate your writing session and make it more effective. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about how to build the ultimate writing playlist or playlists and how we do that start to finish. But before we kick this episode off,
we have to thank our sponsors, who are you guys. You help us keep this show going, and we couldn't do it without you. So we thank you so much. If you get value out of this podcast, go to patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show and help us keep this show alive and free of interruptions. Yeah, this is an exciting topic.
Yeah, this is something we're both very into. Because at first, when we started seeing these requests, we're like, is that really enough content to make an episode about? But then as we were thinking about it, we're like, yes, because we both really engage this a lot. And it's actually something that can really help warp speed you into the writing zone, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
It can set the mood. It can help you write better. And I'm all for curating your writing session. So instead of just letting things sort of interrupt your time or taking time while you're writing to be like, oh, I want some sort of music playing, but I'm not really sure what. And so now you're scrolling through Spotify or maybe YouTube and you're getting distracted and you're you're just spending time trying to find stuff, you know?
Yeah. And the thing I hate the most is when you're going to someone else's playlist or YouTube video or whatever, or Spotify playlists, oftentimes it's just not what you want to listen to.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it starts out kind of okay and then it gets into some annoying songs that you just don't like, and then you're like, oh, now I have to change the playlist again.
So you have to pause, get you out of the
you're
zone.
Getting interrupted over and over again. It's not good.
Like you were saying, like when you're interrupted, it takes you like how many minutes to get fully back into the zone? Like
23 minutes.
Yeah, so we're going to skip that.
Almost
and we're going
full
to make
podcast.
our own writing almost a full podcast. That's a substantial amount of time.
Yeah.
So we curate our own writing playlist based on books and characters and moods. Now, Abbie, I would say, is at like an advanced, like NASA specialist level of playlist curation. And I'm kind of at like beginner, like science fair level with what I'm doing. So I will give you guys some tips about what I'm doing, but Abbie takes it all to the next level because I think it's also because you're a more musical person. Like for those of you who don't know, a lot of you already know Abbie's also an indie musician. She is very musical, very musically talented, and I've never been that musical myself other than enjoying music. So I feel like you're just more, you have like this very, your ear, just like very attuned ear to like, you know, all the musical things, like, oh, that would work well with this and that and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so,
I like to think so anyway.
Yeah, you do, for sure. And so anyone can do this though. So you can kind of take away from like this end of the spectrum to Abbie's end of the spectrum and take what works for you. So doing it by book, for sure. You have a playlist for 100 Days of Sunlight, your debut novel. So what are some of the first things you do when you're like, okay, I'm going to build a playlist? Now, do you build it like all at once or do you work as you go? How do you start that process?
Well, it depends on what stage of the idea I'm at. If I'm at the stage where I have some solid ideas, I probably started making a Pinterest board and writing down my ideas in a messy and coherent way and just kind of brainstorming the characters and stuff. I will start to make a playlist, usually based off, the first thing I'm basing it off of is the mood, the general mood of the book, whether it is mysterious or more happy and carefree, lighthearted, or more
like heavier,
yeah,
darker, moody.
Yes, exactly. So like the general overarching mood or vibe of the story, and genre, I guess. Like 100 Days of Sunlight playlist has a lot of indie folk and indie rock.
So kind of identifying the mood of the book.
A lot of happy, kind of uplifting music, but there's also some sad songs in there too. So it's kind of a good reflection of the book itself in a musical format.
Right. How do you go about finding the individual songs? Are you just pulling from stuff you've heard and artists that you like? Or do you have a specific process, like sort of like what you use for Pinterest, of like actually searching and finding things?
Yeah. Usually I start with songs that I already know and kind of pull from various other playlists, because I've made a lot of other playlists that aren't writing playlists, as you know. Right. I have over 200 playlists on Spotify.
I have like 30.
It's so hard to find things sometimes because I use folders and stuff to categorize them. But even with that, it's like I'll be scrolling all the way up, scrolling all the way down, and I can't find what I'm looking for. I'm like, ah! I just have to end up typing it in, but it's kind of messy after a while. So sometimes I'll pull from those playlists, you know, like I have a playlist that's Road Trip Vibes, it's called, which you've probably seen.
Yes.
And that has a lot of indie rock, folk kind of music. So if it matches the mood of, say, 100 Days of Sunlight, I think some of those songs have been pulled from the same playlist. So I would go to a playlist that kind of has the same mood and find some songs that I feel also fit the themes of the book and just the general vibe and the characters. The characters are another thing that I sometimes make playlists that are just specifically for a character. And then I'll make like a folder, because I do all these on Spotify usually. So I'll make like a folder with a bunch of separate playlists in them, one for each character if it's a larger cast book. Even if it's not, like the Lighthouse book didn't have many characters, but I made a playlist for each of those characters.
Wow.
Because sometimes just writing their point of view, it helps me so much to listen to songs that remind me of them and their internal conflict, even if it's not exactly the vibe of them, but it does fit their internal conflict. Sometimes the vibe will be very contradictory, like it's, you know, a metal rock song and the character is very chill, but their internal conflict is kind of resonated in that song. Right. So that definitely helps me to get into character voice as well.
Right. And like, I think too, for mood, you can have multiple playlists per book. Like, you don't have to do it just based off of book. That's one approach you can take. But if your book, let's say it has multiple characters, this character is like a completely different mood than that character, then you can just have like mood lists for one book.
Yeah.
So like more of a, you know, sad, sentimental, moody, rainy day playlist vibe, and then the opposite spectrum, let's say it also has kind of a hopeful classical vibe. So having those different lists that, depending on what the mood of the chapter is, you can then turn to, oh, this feels like that today.
Yes. Yeah.
You can also do that on one playlist, which is kind of what I've done for my current work in progress. Is I have a whole, like a gigantically long playlist, and I just sort of know where all the different moods are at the different points in the playlist, because they're mostly albums that have been just saved to the playlist. So I'll kind of know where the sections are, like, oh, this album makes me feel this and that one makes me feel that. So I'll kind of curate it based on that.
Yeah, which now I just realized that there are basically, with every writing project, I make two playlists. One which is instrumentals only.
Oh, right, yeah.
And one which is like the official playlist. But the instrumental is more of a soundtrack, even though it's not specifically designed around scenes, or I don't design scenes around, you know, a score or something. Right. But listening to instrumentals, I find is so much easier when I'm writing, rather than Sometimes I can listen to songs
I have to
with
be in like
lyrics.
a very specific
Yeah,
mood to be
same.
able to listen to lyrical music while I write.
Yeah.
Because I find the human voice is very distracting to my brain, and it's like my brain is automatically like, wait, someone's talking. What are they saying? You know what I mean? And then I can't think about what I'm trying to say because I'm actually listening to the lyrics of the song. Whereas when it's just instrumental, you just get into the flow.
Yeah.
And you can hear yourself think. But it's different for everyone. Some people can concentrate much better with lyrical music going. So you have to kind of find what works for you because everybody's different.
Right. Yeah, I find that if it's a slower song, it's easier, which is part of why I've been recently getting into the slowed and reverbed.
Yeah, see, I had never heard of that until you brought that up.
I hadn't heard of it until like a month ago, and I stumbled upon it. I'm like, what is this slowed and reverbed? Like, every song you can possibly think of is on YouTube with a slowed and reverbed version. And basically, if you've never heard of it, look it up. It's a phenomenon. But it's basically you take a song and you kind of pitch bend it to be a bit slower, which usually makes the vocal sound a bit
haunted.
A bit haunted because it's pitch bent
Echoey.
down.
Yeah.
And then they add a reverb to, so it has like this slower, darker, bigger feel to it. And it can be very atmospheric and immersive, I find. It really depends on what music it is, but I've made a few of my own slowed and reverbed playlists just for my own personal use.
It's like so specific.
Yeah, it is. But it's amazing how it can really get me into this trance where I feel very immersed in whatever it is I'm writing at the moment. It's interesting.
That is really interesting.
It's definitely a different feeling than just regular music. So it's worth checking out if you've never heard of it before. Some people love it, some people hate it. But what I do when I create different playlists for books is I have two separate playlists that one has lyrics, one has just instrumentals. So that if I'm like, I don't want to listen to any people talking or singing, I can just go to the instrumental playlist, kind of get the same vibe, but not be distracted by any vocals.
Yeah. A lot of times I listen to my lyrical playlists. Well, I don't really do separate ones, but like the lyrical music that reminds me of my book, I'll listen to like on drives and stuff like that. And it'll just get me thinking about my book. And then when I'm actually writing, I listen to more scores, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Steve Jablonsky, Hans Zimmer.
Yes. Which, by the way, guys, if you haven't seen my writing playlist on my channel that I've been posting intermittently on my YouTube channel, definitely check those out because I continue to post those at least once a month. And I'm really excited to try some new things with those playlists. The future of them is going to be interesting because I'm starting to brainstorm new ways to incorporate music with writing sessions, and it's going to be fun. I don't want to give anything away yet, but it's going to be cool.
Abby also has a ton of playlists on Spotify.
Yes.
So for those of you who use Spotify, Abby has, if you're looking for a mood, like we were just talking about, matching the mood of your book, you have ones that are lyrical and non-lyrical. Like each mood has a lyrical one and a non-lyrical one, just instrumental, I guess is what, non-lyrical, instrumental music to match that. So like fantasy, epic battle, sentimental love confession, sad rainy day, which happy adventuring, all kinds of moods like that. Yeah,
which I've been kind of curating updated versions of those and putting them on YouTube. So the ones that I'm posting on YouTube now are kind of curated based on the writing mood or the scene that you're writing. If you're writing, like you said, a love confession scene, I have one for that, and epic battles, things like that. My heist scenes playlist is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love that one too.
It's like really badass.
It's a great way too. So if you're building a playlist yourself, you can always like go to these and springboard off of them. You know what I mean? So then you start picking a few songs, and then sometimes Spotify will recommend like, well, hey, if you like this composer, here's some music by this one. And then I've discovered so many scores that I loved based off of Spotify pulling up, hey, this composer also did this score over here. And then you can kind of assemble your own playlist because it will be recommending things based off of the mood you already have going, or the composers you already have going, or the artists.
Yeah. That's another way that I find music for my playlists is by listening to other playlists that are about or inspired by books or movies or TV shows that are whatever I've been inspired by to write this new project. That was like an extremely muddy sentence, but you know what I mean? Like, let's say, okay, my new project is inspired by Downton Abbey. I could find a Downton Abbey inspired playlist that has similar music on it and find new composers and new pieces that have a similar vibe that fit my new story playlist.
Exactly.
So that's another way. Or even fictional characters. If you have a fictional character that you love or a fictional ship that you love, your OTP, go see if you can find some playlists for that OTP on Spotify or YouTube even. Right. And you'll probably encounter some new music that inspires you for your characters that you're currently writing.
Yeah. For me too, like music that just makes me feel something, like whatever, if it's related to the book, so that will make me feel transported. I write a lot of fantasy, so I'm looking for more of something that feels like something in my world. So if the world I built feels more like a mystical forest lost in time or something like that, you know, I'm going to look for things that feel more perhaps like Celtic or folk or have a little bit of a mystical vibe to them, the instruments being played and used in the tracks, things that transport me into that feeling so that I feel like I'm almost in that world. You're like creating the atmosphere of your world. And you can do this even if you're not writing fantasy. It's really identify like what elements do I have going here? And then can I find musical versions of those elements?
I like that a lot. Also, I think the inspiration behind your culture in your book, whether it's based on something in the real world or it's just a fantasy world that's inspired by a culture from the real world.
Yes.
I think a lot of writers don't know how to find like those specific moods. But if you can hone in on what is this culture that is really at the root of my inspiration here. Another great place to find music like this is on Epidemic Sound, which is the royalty-free music provider that Kate and I both use for our YouTube channels. Highly recommend that, by the way, if you're a YouTuber or if you're just a writer and you want to listen to some great music that you probably haven't heard before. It's a great place to find new music. And I love their categorization system that if you go to genres and you scroll all the way down, it has like all the genres listed out. And under the world section, there's like every country and like music inspired by all of those different countries, which is so great for like finding different music that is suitable for whether it's fantasy or you're writing a story based in a different culture. You can find some really cool music there that matches that culture and that vibe that you're looking for.
That's really
Which
cool.
Sometimes it's just harder to find that because you're like, well, what artists make that music that I'm like, that really specific music that I'm looking for.
Right.
So that categorization system is, I find, really well organized and easy to navigate. So that's another.
You can also find so many amazing artists that are usually from those countries and cultures making music.
Yeah.
And it's like we found so many artists that we really enjoy their music from there that we might not have found otherwise.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I think Spotify also has a section of,
I think they do, different countries.
I'm pretty sure they do as well, but it's harder because it's not usually it's harder to find like the instrumentals, which is easier to, I find, customize in Epidemic because there's a tab when you go to search those things that is vocals or instrumentals, and you can just click instrumental and it like automatically weeds out all the vocals, which is fun. Nothing worse than turning on a playlist thinking it's instrumental and then like halfway through it a song with vocals comes on and scares you and you're like, what
What's another thing too is that if you hit a song that's like, wow, I really love this song, I wish it didn't have vocals in it, you can actually just download the stems and eliminate the vocal, and then you just have a really cool instrumental. And you can also like mess around with like adding like the harmony versus the instruments, and you can kind of curate your own like soundscape even. It's really cool because they also have sound effects and things sometimes from those different different types of music that you can browse on those categories.
Yeah, that's very true. That could be really fun to do, is like build your own atmosphere. Yeah, and there's also like tons of writing atmospheres on YouTube to discover as well. Right. For like, even if they're not writing atmospheres specifically, I know we've seen a lot that are different study mixes and stuff. Last winter I was like constantly listening to this one that was the Chronicles of Narnia ambient worlds.
Yeah, those are cool.
And it was like the snowy background with just the soundtrack and the sound of like wintry sound effects, and it was so relaxing and nice to listen to. Even though I wasn't writing fantasy, it was very nice.
Yeah, that's another thing you can do is like if you know of a TV series or film that is within the certain genre or type of world that you're currently writing in, look up the scores, because a lot of times they're already going to use instruments and things that feel very atmospheric to the world you're already writing in.
Yeah.
And then you can also look up 3-hour study mix of Lord of the Rings atmosphere or whatever, fill in the blank, Narnia atmosphere, and you'll find these curated playlists and soundscapes that already have been edited to seamlessly run for 3 hours, so you don't have to worry about it ending. So those are another thing we like to add to our playlists too.
Yeah.
When we're writing.
Yeah.
For those nice long uninterrupted sessions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so there's like so many different ways that you can build inspiration and immersive writing sessions through music of all kinds.
Yeah, for me, like the main thing that I do is the moods, really. Is I just will have usually one playlist per book, and I'll call it whatever I want. I usually don't name it after the book. I usually name it something else. And then I just import, save, add as many albums as I find from various scores and also lyrical music from various artists that remind me of the book. And then usually as Spotify starts suggesting different things, then I'll listen to those once the playlist ends. And a lot of times I'll find related things. I'm like, ooh, yeah, that reminds me of it too. And I'll just build it from there. But I usually start with a few solid scores, and me and Abby are really big enthusiasts of scores. We're always talking about composers all the time because we have our favorites, and we listen to a lot of different composers.
Yeah, it's also interesting how
we geek out about it so much. Like, you guys should hear our family dinner discussions, and everyone's just like, okay, no one else knows who all these composers are, so...
Yeah, the good discussion of who would you have compose the music for your book turned movie. It's always so hard to
It is. That's such a hard question.
It's almost as hard of a question as who would be the actors to portray your characters.
To me, I've like thought about 10 times more like who would compose the soundtrack. Like I've had so many people ask me, who would you want to play the characters? And I'm like, I don't know. But I would want either Hans Zimmer, Steve Jablonsky, or Daniel Pemberton to score it.
Yes.
So I have that figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, so true.
Like, who's that? Like the composer you listen to like the most for like 100 days?
I probably listen to Thomas Newman the most out of like any composer. Spotify once sent me this thing that was like, you are in the top 0.5% of Thomas Newman's fans, and like
I didn't even know they sent out things like that.
Yeah, they gave me like
an
this little
actual
badge
award.
Yeah,
a digital award for
not even the top 1%, but the top 0.5%.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a super fan.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I also have a whole playlist that's just called Thomas Newman and Chill, and it's all
Abby has it. If you guys are some of you guys I know are nodding your heads to all this composer talk because you're into it too. But if you're like, I'd like to listen to some of those, Abby has playlists that are just those big different composers.
Yeah. My favorite composers, the best of, in my humble opinion, my favorite tracks by them, my favorite scores by them. There are so many that I love, and it's so hard to choose, like you were saying.
It is.
It's like the impossible question there.
I know, it is so hard.
But yeah, it's another thing that is interesting about composers is sometimes you'll notice patterns with like a certain composer tends to do a lot of composing for a certain genre of films, whether that is kind of more darker, creepier films,
right,
or more period dramas, or more lighthearted stories, and so you can find a lot of more scores that are similar to what you're looking for just by going to that artist's page and looking at their other scores that they've done. Because usually they tend to do like a lot of similar genre films, which can be really helpful, I find.
Right.
Yeah, so
for sure. Like, so if there's an element you're like, oh, I love that element, you can usually find a lot more like that. Yeah. Because there's going to be similarities with different scores that they do. Some things that even when we'll hear a track and we don't even know what it is yet, it'll be like, oh, I know that that's that composer, and it always is, because you'll hear
always recognize Thomas Newman.
Exactly.
It's like
just you signature sounds.
You can play me a soundtrack by him, of assortment of soundtracks that I've never heard before, because there are some that I have not heard before, believe it or not, and I would know that it's it's him. It's like there are just some trademark instruments, some trademark sounds, and it's just so interesting.
Yeah, it is.
I also find it
like I can always usually identify Daniel Pemberton.
Yeah,
like the different textures,
which is so interesting.
Textures, just layers of different interesting texture that will just add so much to again the building an atmosphere, not just having music playing, but building an actual atmosphere. It's so cool.
I find it really interesting with Thomas Newman, not just like fangirl over Thomas Newman, but I find it really interesting with his scores that he will use certain instruments like the pan flute. Okay, you've heard the pan flute so many times in Thomas Newman's scores, and he can make it sound so fitting for whatever piece it is in, no matter what genre it is. Like whether it's Finding Nemo or Passengers, like sci-fi, it works, or Little Women, the original 90s film, which he did the score for, or Tolkien, or
the soundtrack for Tolkien was
what was the other one I was thinking
Magic.
of? Oh, I can't remember the other one was, but he's done like Bridge of Spies is another one. So many different genres that you hear the same like instruments, the same sounds and textures, and it has a whole different feeling. And it's so interesting and inspiring to me as a musician and just as a listener in general, that you can take the same instrument or technique and use it in different ways that makes it have a whole different atmosphere. But anyway, fangirling over. Sorry.
So I think we went over some really awesome ways. This was more of just an organic conversation, so I hope you guys sort of got a glimpse into how we do this. There's not really a strict method to our madness here. It's just finding composers, finding soundtracks, finding artists that resonate and sort of match an atmosphere, and then finding other things that those same artists or composers create, or identifying a certain instrument or mood and looking those things up on YouTube for like atmospheric things, stuff in your genre, or stuff on Spotify. So you can find quite a bit and just sort of springboard from there.
Yeah.
Whether you're making mood boards or a board for your book specifically, or sub boards for your characters if you want to get super fancy like Abby.
Yes.
You can do that too.
Yeah, all of it is so good, so inspiring. As long as you don't go overboard and get distracted and don't actually end up writing.
Do this ahead of time.
Yes.
Do it ahead of time and have it ready for yourself.
Exactly. It's a great thing to prime your writing sessions and get yourself in
really
the
helps
mood.
You submerge into the story.
Yeah. For sure. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, give it a thumbs up if you're on YouTube. If not, you can see the video version of this podcast on Kate's YouTube channel. Thank you again to our amazing sponsors who make this show possible. We love you guys so much, and we will see you in the next one. Until then,
stay stoked
and rock on.